I'm interested, since everybody here, and I've done someone who's written about well-known historical figures, why would a writer do that? And this is a trend that seems certainly in the last 10 or 20 years, that's something that's become very, very popular. You know, many writers and many speculative fiction writers have chosen to write about historical figures. Why do you think that is? I mean, why would you be drawn to write about, you know, Beethoven, a real character, rather than somebody who you would make up out of whole cloth?
Well, you're asking really about the whole alternate world, alternate universe, counter reality, which seemed to overtake science fiction in the 80s and the 90s. And I thought about that quite a bit. I think decadence is part of the answer, a kind of turning within rather than looking without. And it became quite an arcane business to put, to make what, Elvis Presley a statesman, for instance, to take historical characters and have them doing something else, became virtually a subgenre, or have them doing another version of what they did. There was alternate Kennedys and alternate presidents did by Resnick, which were huge anthologies devoted to this. What's the point? I echo you. Having perpetrated this and having done what I think are some very good stories of this one, so what? Where does it take you?
I think I take your point actually, because that whole alternate universe or alternate biography subgenre actually annoyed me an awful lot, even though I am guilty of it. Okay, and I guess the way I would resolve myself is that I, like John, would try I do an awful lot of research. It's very short story. I do tons of research, read biographies, and be as faithful as I possibly could to the people as they were. You know, I did this story where George Bush and Fidel Castro became Major League Baseball players. Okay. All right. Here's the deal. You know, but George Bush was a very good baseball player. He was the captain of the Yale baseball team, and they played in the College World Series in 1948. Okay, and he was looked at by the Cleveland Indians. Right?
I wish they had taken him out.
And Castro again was a first-rate pitcher and was scouted by the New York Giants. And so I basically was not like, you know, other people would say, okay, suppose Martin Luther King were the point guard for the Celtics, you know? You know, and the problem with that is that Martin Luther King, you know, didn't play basketball, all right? And it's just a kind of arbitrary game that it seems to me is you know, I think the impulse is, because these are famous people, you sort of get an automatic cachet from using the name, okay? And using the most obvious traits that we know, that everyone knows about them, you know, and that's it, okay? Kennedy suffered Marilyn Monroe, that's all we need to know, okay? And he started the Moon program, and he got shot in Dallas, and that's it. We don't need to know anything more about Kennedy than that, and we'll write any number of stories about him. And that seems to be difficult to justify.
But there is essentially, I remember immediately post 9/11, Jack Womack and I, oh my God, I remember right at the line, all that. And I noticed at that point that mainstream writers, for a lot of them, turning to historical fiction that, whether in speculative fiction, science fiction, whatever, we have a sense that we now have some control over it. We can do whatever we want with it. Whereas the future, we don't know. You know, we imagine this thing and that thing, and
yeah, actually, I was going to offer or throw out two thoughts. I mean, one thought is that, you know, it's back to that old question, right? You know, what makes history? You know, is history made by great individuals? Is history made by, so, you know, it's Tolstoy and so on. So, I mean, you can make the argument that one thing that at their best these stories are engaging with is that question. You know, what would happen if George Bush had played baseball? First base. Okay. You know, and how would that have shaped or affected history? I think it's also interesting to think that even pre 9/11, go back to the fall of the Berlin Wall, and suddenly we move into this, remember the death of history or the end of history or whatever it was. Suddenly history, which it seems for most of our lives, so firmly defined and structured and what have you, became very malleable again. It became very much in flux. Remember how we weren't going to have any more spy thrillers? Because that was it. The Cold War was over. John le Carré was out of business. And obviously that hasn't happened. So it may be that part of our impetus to return to history, to ask these questions about history, at least at its best, comes out of this greater sense that things are in flux and in very profound ways and very unsettling ways, very disturbing ways.
I agree with Barry to a certain degree, that I think this is a sign of a decadence in literature. And I don't necessarily think that it's lazy on the part of writers to do this. I think it's a good excuse to do research, which we all love to do. But if we're going to, move away from historical figures to basing characters on people that we know, all right? When you're dealing with historical figures, a certain amount of work is done for you. You have a shorthand. We know Kennedy slept with Marilyn Monroe, whatever. We have that there. When you're basing characters in your fiction on people that you know or that you have observed closely within your personal life, how does that relate, or does it at all, to basing characters in fiction on historical figures, John?
This is the anecdote I've been preparing for this panel all week. The only thing I could think of saying, I got the assignment, and that was that the very first horror story I got any recognition for, I wrote when I was a freshman in high school. I won the Christmas writing contest, Our Lady of Lourdes High School in 1983. $12.50 was the first prize. And publication in the school newspaper, which was the real bonus. And it was about a little boy whose parents have a huge fight on Christmas. And so he makes his toys sort of through some unspecified psychic means. His mother runs out of the house. He makes his toys come alive and kill his father. My dad was very disturbed by this. He gave me this long lecture in the car. Not the kind of fiction I want to see you write. But my dad was actually, he had more of a point than I realized. That the year before, my parents had a massive fight on Christmas. Now, here's the thing. When I wrote the story, I had completely forgotten that fact. And in fact, it was only 8 years later when I was telling this story. I was talking about the story I had written to my girlfriend at the time. She said to me, "Wow, you never got over that fight your parents had." And I swear you could have knocked me over with a feather. I mean, I was literally just stupefied by it. Oh my God, no wonder Dad was so upset. So there's a way in which it just seems to me inescapable. You cannot help but write about the people in your life, especially if they've had this sort of powerful impact on you. You may not obviously be conscious of it, even when I'm sure my father just would have smacked his head and said, "You're kidding. You had no idea you were doing this." He probably wouldn't have believed me. But, and I kind of can't believe it in retrospect either, but it was profoundly true. So I don't think that you can escape that. I don't think you can escape writing about drawing on the people in your life. And if you need to do it, if within you, I guess, the lower levels of your consciousness, if this stuff needs to come out, it will find its way out. Your brain will, "Oh no, it has nothing to do with that." And I was really worried that I was ripping off Stephen King. That was my big concern. Oh, the story about little toy soldiers, So there, that's it. That's my anecdote. I told that number.